It has been over a decade since the Dark Knight Trilogy first hit theaters, yet the movies still stand out as something different. In a world where superhero movies often feel predictable and childish, Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight movies does the opposite, bringing a dark and realistic theme to the genre. But how did a franchise once nearly left for dead by Hollywood come back to redefine superhero movies forever? This is the true story of how Christopher Nolan saved Batman. To start this story, we need to go back to 1997, when the movie Batman and Robin was released. With its cheesy one-liners, cartoonish visuals, and over-the-top performances, the movie quickly became disliked. And it was pretty clear that this was a Batman no one wanted to see. With a terrible IMDb rating of 3.8 and receiving massive backlash from critics and fans, the movie became a widely known disaster. This was a huge wake-up call for Warner Brothers, and it was clear that they had a big job ahead for their next Batman movie. They needed a breath of fresh air to the genre, someone who could come in with a different view. And after a while of looking and turning down multiple different directors, they finally found the right man for the job. That man turned out to be none other than Christopher Nolan, who was hired for Batman Begins in 2003. At the time, Nolan wasn't the obvious choice for the job. He was more of a talented, up-and-coming director. Nolan had done a good job with his previous movies, with Memento and Insomnia being the two biggest. But making such a big film was a huge step up from his previous work, and being only his fourth movie, he still had a lot to prove. When Nolan first started making Batman Begins, he made it very clear that he didn't want to take the traditional route of making superhero movies. Instead of using flashy effects and bad CGI, he wanted a more realistic look focused on the storytelling. The Batman and Robin movie I mentioned earlier was an exact example of what Nolan did not want to do. In his words, he wanted to create a Batman that felt like it could exist in the real world. But reinventing Batman was no easy task. You see, Nolan wasn't just making another superhero movie. He was reviving one of the most iconic characters in cinema history. His vision was bold. He wanted a more complex Batman with real-world problems, someone who could resonate with audiences around the world, instead of just relying on over-the-top action and predictable plots. After getting hired as the director for Batman Begins, Nolan quickly got to work, and one of the first steps needed was forming the city of Gotham. When creating the city, Nolan had the idea of creating a huge metropolis with a dark and realistic feel. And with the help of production designer Nathan Crowley, they took on the task of doing just that. Taking inspiration from cities like Chicago, New York, and Tokyo, they wanted a city that felt both real and alive. And after a lot of thought and planning, they finally decided on the design for Gotham. When shooting the movie, Nolan used minimal CGI and mostly practical effects. This is a conscious move he makes in most of his movies to this day. Nolan has stated that he thinks practical effects make movies more authentic, something CGI often lacks. This approach paid off when Batman Begins was released to theaters in 2005. The movie quickly turned out to be a big success, and the people wanted more. Warner Brothers saw a huge potential in taking the Batman franchise to another level. Even though it seemed risky to completely change the way and look of an already established movie series, it paid off. After many years of failing and struggling, Batman was finally back, and now better than ever. For DC and Warner Bros., this marked a fresh start and a chance to rebuild the legacy of their most iconic hero. While the movie may not be as good as the iconic 1989 Batman, Christopher Nolan's vision made sure the franchise was set for a bright future. His next two movies confirmed just that, with The Dark Knight being known as one of the greatest movies ever. A big reason for this huge success is the brilliant cast and characters in the trilogy. With casts consisting of famous actors like Morgan Freeman, Cillian Murphy, Aaron Eckhart, Michael Caine, Gary Oldman, and a lot more. It was safe to say the movies had some of the biggest stars in Hollywood. But it's not only the actors themselves who make these movies special, it is also the way they interpret their characters and roles. A standout example of this is the villains in the movies, with Heath Ledger's Joker in The Dark Knight and Tom Hardy's Bane in The Dark Knight Rises being the most notable. But we can't forget the performances of Cillian Murphy's Scarecrow, Aaron Eckhart's Two-Face, and Henry Ducard's Ra's al Ghul either. There is a reason why these characters work so well. You see, while other movies often only focus on the heroes, the Dark Knight movies take a little bit of a different approach. Instead of just making the villains an obstacle for the protagonist, Nolan focused on their backstories and motivations behind their evil actions. And this is what fascinates me the most about the movies. As an example, both Bane and the Joker are shaped by deep traumas and life problems from the past, which is what drives their desire to destroy and do evil. Interestingly, there's also a resemblance between those two and Bruce Wayne. Even though he comes from a wealthy background, he also experienced unimaginable trauma in his childhood. Witnessing his parents getting killed right in front of him at the age of 8 wasn't easy, but instead of doing evil and blaming it on his past, Bruce decided to use this as motivation to do good. And on the subject of Bruce Wayne, it is essential to mention his name when talking about Batman movies. Portrayed by Christian Bale, his role was perfectly executed. Once again, this all comes down to Nolan's brilliant recruitment of actors for the movies. With the complexity of Bale's acting, he took on both sides of Bruce Wayne, being a wealthy businessman by day and fighting crime as Batman by night. But what actually makes the Dark Knight movie so different? For me, it's Christopher Nolan. Yes, there are other factors that make the trilogy unique, but none of those things would be possible without the brilliant mind of Nolan. From his storytelling and memorable characters to his originality, realistic visuals, and brilliant music. Nolan's catalogue is nothing short of spectacular, but most of all, it is the way he thinks differently than other directors that makes him truly special. Where others might rely on CGI, Nolan insists on making his stunts real, even if it means losing millions of dollars or making countless attempts. The Dark Knight movies still have a huge impact on not only the superhero genre, but also on movies in general, from being praised around the world to winning multiple awards. Most notable are the 3 Oscars won throughout the films. The first one for Best Cinematography in Batman Begins, the second for Best Sound Mixing in The Dark Knight, and the last and most memorable one being Best Supporting Actor for Heath Ledger's role as the Joker in The Dark Knight. What's your opinion on the Dark Knight Trilogy? Let me know your thoughts and what you want to see me cover in my next video.